Hey there and welcome back. I have recently discovered digital painting and I really like what's happening here. So I'm going to show you the entire process from start to finish on this project I'm working on. So let's get right to it. This project I'm working on has me doing 4 different digital paintings from different regions that I went to on my road trip that I took in September. I am a professor and I'm on sabbatical, and when you do a sabbatical, you need to focus on a project, something that advances you professionally, something that advances you artistically, creatively in my case. And so I wanted to do a project, of course, that has photography related to it because photography is my thing as far as my personal expression of creativity. But I needed to expand it beyond that because I teach a lot of different aspects of creativity in the design program in which I teach. So I wanted to do something, and the way I proposed it was to say I'm going to do illustrations of these locations that I visit. But I've never really explored digital painting at any type of length or depth or anything like that. I have been assigning it to my students for years, where I have them explore the brushes, I have them do this and do that, and usually the results are pretty awesome. They do great work. But I have been really lacking in that area until now, when I have been able to dive deep in my own work and do some digital painting for myself. And that's where this sabbatical experience comes into play. At the time of this recording, I have 6 days until I'm due back in the classroom. So I've got 1 painting left, and I've done my other 3 so far. And what we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you those right now, where they come from Isle Royale National Park, Minnesota's North Shore. I decided to take Split Rock Lighthouse State Park and show you that as far as representing the whole notion of Minnesota's North Shore, and then Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So I've already done those paintings. I've worked out a pretty good process that we're going to be getting into here very soon. So the final park that I've included in this overall project, I needed to do 4 regions or 4 parks, but my final park is Badlands National Park. And boy howdy, did I love shooting there at Badlands, and I loved processing those images. But now it's time to get on with making this painting and then finally making these posters. That's the whole point, is to bring it all together and have a nice collection of posters that we're going to be able to just showcase. Maybe I'll be able to sell them. I don't know. That's not my point. My point is to design a cohesive collection of posters from these 4 distinct regions that I visited. So let's get started with this creative process. We're going to start in Lightroom and then just take it from there. My point here in Lightroom is to take the best of the best images and to then select some of those. So when I was out there at Badlands National Park, these last 3 days are the images that I shot. So you can see here I've got 568 from the first day I was there, 320, then 130. So that's quite a, that's a lot of images, almost 1,000 images, probably just, I don't know, I haven't done the math, but you could do the math if you wanted to. So as far as all of my Badlands National Park images are concerned, I selected 41 that are somewhat cream of the crop images. They may not be the best, or they may not be, the ultimate awesomest images, but what they do is they could connect with other images, they could tell a story, they could somehow round out the experience while I was there. And that was my point with my initial edit, to just select images that really can help tell the story of what was going on when I was there. I then go and I edit all of those images. So as we look in the develop module, each of these images has various developments, and then I was big on doing these new masks that Lightroom has now. And some images only have a couple of masks or 1 mask. You can see this one has, 5 different masks. So it just depends on the nature of the image and what was needed there for processing that image. Some images I went full on with luminosity masking and making this ghostly appearance of this place from the Notch Trail. All of this work has already been done, and now it's time to move on and say, okay, which of these images is going to make it to my final painting? Of course, I could do several, but I'm under a crunch. I need to make 4 paintings, I need to make 4 posters, and that is my ultimate goal. I need to hone in on what those items are going to be. So then I take all these images. So I'm going to go ahead and select them all. I then use the print process here in Lightroom, and I just print out what you might call something like a contact sheet. Now there's 9 per page, so this is certainly a larger contact sheet. But what I like to do is I want to get these images into the real world, because my ultimate goal is to have a physical printed product, and I need to have that vision in mind. And by getting it printed, I can just see it in a different light. I can have a different sense, a different interpretation about that image. And so I like to get these things printed out as quickly as possible. In this case, I had 41 images. It turns out to be about 5 sheets of paper. So I go through and set my items here to get it printed, and I like to put an identity plate on it so I can just have it. Now, the first ones I printed didn't have the identity plate, and I was like, this is silly. Let's get that on there so each one has it labeled where it's from, and it just makes it a lot easier when I'm dealing with all these different printouts, because they're just all over my workspace. All right, working on the print resolution, getting this all set up. Really key here, making sure our profile is set to the paper that we're using, and then of course making sure we have it, just every image selected that we actually want to print, and then you hit the old print button. So once it's printed, we then head on over to my work table, and I go through and I make a selection. First off, just check marking which images will make it to the next round, as it were, which will survive to the next round of editing. And what I'm looking for in these images is something that says, okay, I really want to hone it in. I've got a certain vision in my mind about what this project needs to take on, and this part of the project, I should say, because I've done 3 others already. And now, what do I want unique characteristics? What do I want to come through in this region, in this area? What is important for me to communicate? And so I select images that help me communicate that. And the point here is to say, look, I've got, what is this, 5, 6, 7 images of this animal here on the ridge that I've ultimately selected as, hey, these are really cool images. I really like these images. They serve a purpose somehow. Do I really need that many when I move forward with this project? Probably not. I only need maybe 1 or 2 of those images. But then after I check mark them, I'm going to go ahead and take this big fat Sharpie, and I'm going to mark on there these ideas, these rough crop ideas of what might make a good idea for a poster. The size I'm going for is 16 by 20 in the overall painting size. Now, incidentally, that happens to be the overall poster size as well. So I end up shrinking that down just a little bit, but I decided if I wanted to sell these or print these or frame these or whatever the case separately, I wanted to have these as individual posters as well, where they could be just the painting, nothing but the painting. Maybe I'll put it on canvas, maybe some other, who knows what I'll do, but I'm going to make that a standard size so it's easier to frame if I decide to go and frame it later. So I'm just literally marking up these sheets, and as you can see here in the video I'm showing you, as I go through all of these items, all of these 5 pages, I've marked up several options. And when I have these several options going, what I'm looking for is just saying, look, let's explore, let's figure out which one of these ones that I checked, which one is the thing, which one is the photo, or which 5 are the photo that have a lot of potential for, they could become a poster. And as you can see on some of them, I really needed to do a couple options, and so they just looked all messed up and marked up, and that's fine. It's all part of the creative process. I then go through and I make a mood board. Now the mood board is done in InDesign. And I'm going to show you the mood board for Theodore Roosevelt National Park first, and then we'll take a look also at the mood board for Badlands National Park. So this Theodore Roosevelt National Park, you can see I've got a lot of images here on the side still, but I've selected these few images. These images came to the top. These images said, okay, these are the ultimate ones that really speak to this project. These set the tone for what I wish to communicate with this project. Now, incidentally, I also was able to use the actual photo that I turned into a painting. That's this horse photo down here in the corner. I used that one as my final painting in the final rendition of my poster. Now, as you can see on this mood board, I have a collection of, images from Badlands National Park. Now I still need to create my custom letter mark. I do a hand-rendered custom letter mark for each location as well. That will be also shown on the poster. And so this is just a placeholder right now. This is still from Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I have it truncated here because I don't think I need all of that length to just say Badlands, because it's just 3 words in this one, Badlands National Park. You can see I have different images of different sizes here. They all come in at the same size, but then when I mess with them and work with them, you know, there was a time when this image was here. But then I decided, you know, ultimately I have enough of these sunset, enough of these color, you know, defining images. I need to come up with something else. And so I was like, you know what, I really love this idea of communicating something about the grasslands and the transition that we have there. Now, does that mean that the final image is going to exactly communicate that? Possibly, possibly not. But this is just, again, setting the overall tone, the overall mood, that's why we call it a mood board, for what this project is about and what is going to be influenced in the final painting. All right, got a couple other images, and then I, you know, threw in a couple black and whites because I really love the texture coming through. I'm going to be emphasizing texture in this project. In the end, I've decided pretty much I'm going to go with this image here. So notice this image didn't even make it to the mood board, but that's okay. It doesn't need to. One last item on the mood board is this color palette. Now I've decided that these 3 colors are going to be consistent throughout the entire project, but each location gets their own special color. And so what I do there is I hop into Photoshop. So I'm going to grab this image. I'm going to click on my link here. And so it tells me, okay, this is the exact image. I'm going to hit edit. And then when I'm in Photoshop, I can then just grab this color and I can sample the color. I then take a look here and I make a swatch that is extremely similar to what this is. I usually round it up to the nearest 5, but I'll just take a color swatch in InDesign and create that color. Now that is going to then be the color that is consistent throughout the entire project for that location. And then each of these items, these are consistent also throughout the entire project for every location. So these are universal colors. These 3 are universal colors, and then this one is unique to that special location. So Theodore Roosevelt National Park has this beige color, and then the other locations have various blues. So the Isle Royale National Park and Minnesota's North Shore. Once I have the mood board set and I've got that printed and it is, you know, basically ready to go, it's time to start the work in Photoshop. So that's the next phase to say, okay, we've got our image. Let's take a look at working in Photoshop. The first thing I want to do is I want to save this out so I don't have a mistake of overwriting that image. So I'm going to Command-Shift-S and I'm going to save it out here. I don't need my green tag on there. And I'm going to go to the poster art and I'm just going to call this poster 1. I'll leave it as a TIFF, and I need the layered documents. We're going to get several layers going here. All right, and leave the embedded color profile. Absolutely, I want to do that. And it gives me my TIFF options over here, and so we're good to go. Now the second step is to crop the image. Without cropping, I mean, we need to I just need to crop it, right? So I need to have it sized exactly what I need it to be. So it is going to be 16 by 20 at 300 pixels per inch. That's going to give me plenty of resolution. If I were to print this on canvas, I can take that down to 150 pixels per inch, which means I can double the size. So that'll be 32 by 40 inches. That's a pretty good size for a canvas. So I'm not going to be too concerned about my size in that regard, because that's probably big enough. Now the first poster I did, I actually doubled this resolution. I went 600 pixels, and that was overkill as far as just really bogging down my system, but also just I realized I really didn't need that extra resolution. Now I'm going to shorten this down according to the crop that I did in the little thumbnail, the little item that was printed off. I got something a little more along these lines, but I also know I want to increase my sky a little bit. So I'm going to actually crop this up and add a little more sky here. The fact that I have that white ledge doesn't matter at all. It's all going to be painted. It's not going to be a problem at all. In fact, I'll probably even fill it, because my first painting stage will require that I have color everywhere. Otherwise that white will show up, and I don't want that to happen. So something in this neighborhood, and I'm also going to be paying attention to, you know, if I were to have a little tidbit like this, I would crop that out or just plan for getting rid of that when I paint. But since I do use some of the texture in the end, I really want to pay attention to what I'm doing here, so I can then utilize that texture, that image texture, and bring it back into the painting. So that's something I want to think about too, is I'm not going to be completely loosey-goosey with everything that goes on with the painting, at least if I can help it. All right, this little nodule thing down here is almost annoying, but I'm deciding I'm not going to worry about that, because I still want a little extra sky here. And then I also, hey, I need to keep my aspect ratio, my 16:20 aspect ratio. So I'm going to go with this. I love the idea that this is centered. It's really symmetrical, but we have this major element down here in the lower left, and then we're able to see these progressions of these Badlands hoodoos and all the wonderful texture it has. But of course, then that brilliant sky, that brilliant shining of everything coming down. So I'm thinking this is gonna work. You know, maybe I have to choose a different picture in the end, but we're gonna go with this one. I have a feeling this is gonna work just fine. So I'll hit the old return key, and let's hit Command 0 to view it all. And now I'm going to select my magic wand tool. There it is, magic wand. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill this, but I don't want to fill the sun. So I'm going to do this as contiguous, and I'm going to redo that so it only grabs that portion. And if I hit Shift Delete, it brings up the fill, and I'm going to do content aware. And then I'm going to hit OK. And it should fill that with some nice orange. Hit Command D, and it looks really seamless. If this was the end result, I would definitely zoom in and make sure that that was perfectly seamless. But since this is a painting, not going to be concerned at all about that. All right, the next part of the process is to do a painting with the art history brush. This is where it gets possibly a little bit tricky, because the art history brush is really finicky. And what I like to do on that is just get myself a copy. Now let me show you what can happen here. If I try and do the painting on a blank layer and I go to the art history brush, see, it doesn't work, and it won't even work here on this one either. The problem is, let's go ahead and get on this one. It might still give us the work on the blank layer, but let's see what happens. The problem is, I need to go to my history panel and I need to create a new snapshot, and then I'm going to set my art history brush. I'm going to set that to draw from, or to take its source from, that snapshot. When that happens, then I can use the art history brush. Now notice I am able to actually paint this time on the blank layer, but what my experience has been, it shows up white. Oh, that's so annoying, because basically it's using the background color. It's not drawing its color from the layers beneath. As we look through the items here, there's nothing that says pick up from the layers underneath. So what I've just decided to do, now I've seen other examples on YouTube, I've decided I'm just going to not worry about that. So I'm going to hit Command D, and I'm going to get on my background copy, and I'm going to then be able to paint on that. And I'm just modifying, destructively editing and modifying whatever is on that background copy. So let's take a quick look at the brush that I'm using. Now these brushes I pulled from a different video that I found on YouTube that was dealing with this art history brush, and it was actually kind of complicated to download these. But what I ended up doing was downloading these brushes. Now they look like, to me, just standard brushes. Now there's a little bit that we need to learn about with these brushes. Now when I come over here up in the upper left hand corner, it can tell me right here which is highlighted, this dry brush MD, so it's highlighted over here, but there's no special designation over on the side here, so we know that this is just a standard shape brush. It's not a big deal. When we are looking at some of the other brushes that we're going to get into in just a moment, I've downloaded the Mega Pack brushes from Adobe. I'll go ahead and include the link in the description, so make sure you grab that from you. All you need is an Adobe ID, so even if you have the free Adobe ID, you can still have access to download these brushes, and then you can import these brushes just by going to the hamburger menu up here, and you hit import brushes. You go and find the file that you've downloaded. It's an ABR file, .abr, and then you can load these brushes right into Photoshop. But what I found works really well are these real oils under the Mega Pack, and then the Kyle's real oils. I really liked the wet oil and the oils 01. Those items we're going to use a lot going forward. But for now, what I really liked with this art history brush is this dry brush MD. And let's just go ahead and start painting with that. Now, to do my painting, I use a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I have it mapped only to this screen because I have a 2-screen setup. And so to have it mapped only here gives me a good aspect ratio, and I don't have anything stretching one way or the other. But all I do is literally just paint. And now this, I'm going to show you both sides of it, basically what you see on screen and what I'm doing here on the tablet. And this process itself goes extremely quickly. And now you might be thinking, Brent, this is looking hideous. And of course it's looking hideous. That's fine. The larger the brush I do, if I hit the right bracket, I do a larger brush, you can see it gets even less detail. And if I do a smaller brush, it then gets a lot more detail. So let's do some more detail around here with this object here. Basically, as long as I get a medium amount of detail, I'm pretty good, I'm fine. And in the end, we're not gonna see hardly any of this coming through. I just want this as a foundation, because these other oil brushes, when I use those, they end up leaving some holes, and I don't like those holes. So I've found this process, this technique that I really like happening when I utilize this process with this underlayment, if you will, of this art history brush. Now, it is drawing all of its source from that snapshot. So whatever it is that you have in that snapshot, if you did some other manipulations or whatever, create a snapshot, then it's going to draw everything from that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use a smaller brush. Oops, let's get the right keyboard shortcut. That is the left bracket. And I'm going to go along the horizon here to get a tighter horizon line. There we are. And then I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. And then we're going to take a look at some of our brush settings, because I like to have, what I'm probably going to do, I will probably utilize this exact rendition of the brush for the sky, but not for what's down below. And the reason being is because I can create a little bit of texture in the sky that I really like. And I want to be able to do that, but I want to enhance my texture just a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here to color dynamics, and I'm going to take my hue jitter. And what this is going to do, it's going to sample whatever area it's sampling from the photograph, and it's going to apply that into the brush, and it paints it. Well, by having a hue jitter, it's allowing it to shift either way from its color wheel designation, and it will give me a little bit of variation of color. And I just want a tiny amount, probably 4 is too high. And then my saturation jitter, about 7% is probably pretty good. And then I can do a brightness jitter. I really don't want to do a brightness jitter so much. I'm going to leave that down to 0. But my saturation jitter will allow the colors to be a little more saturated or a little less saturated on either side of that idea of whatever the color originally is. It will become a little more or a little less saturated. So I like that idea. So I'm going to then zoom in a little bit here, and let's take a look now at what this will do for us. And I'm going to stay up towards the top here because I don't really want to affect that horizon line. That horizon line, I have a bit of a finer approach already going on there. So I'm going to leave it largely up here along the top and try not to affect so much. See, I'll affect a little bit down there where it encroaches on that horizon. But as you can see, I'm trying not to, I'm not going to go right on the horizon because then it does that. There we go. And I've pretty much obliterated what I did before with the horizon. There we go. That's pretty good. But that helps me. I have a nice, relatively tight horizon line. And then I've got a potentially fairly interesting painting in what's going on with the sky as well. You know, I can always do customized vignetting and things like that later on if I need to darken this corner or whatever, so I'm not terribly concerned about stuff. But I think that's coming along pretty good. All right, so let's label this Art History Base. And then I'm going to turn it off because I don't want to have that affecting the rest of my brushing. So now we're going to go with this brush here. This is the Mixer Brush Tool. The beauty of the Mixer Brush Tool is it can collect information from multiple layers and then put it on a new layer for you. And that's really cool stuff. So let's take a look though. This can be a little bit confusing. Let's take a look at what's going on with the Megapack mixer brushes here. So I'm going to go back down to the Real Oils, and you can see here on this Real Oils 1, this is the base one. This is the one I use as my initial start. This is what, you know, really comes through really well. But notice this little icon here. I've got a great little icon that is the exact same thing as this mixer brush here, so it works really well. If I were to take up, say, this brush, notice it has this smudge icon. When I click on that, it switches me to the smudge tool. So we want to be very careful with which brush we're actually selecting because it affects which tool we can use. And that's why it's really important to understand, okay, about these brushes, we want to make sure we're really on the right deal here. And that icon helps us understand that. Now with this, well, again, with the erasers, it takes us to the eraser. But this is assigning that eraser tool to this special form that they have in the brush. All right, with this drawing box, again, a smudge going on, ink box. This looks like it's the pencil tool. What is that? Is that the pencil tool? Yes, that's the pencil tool. So we just have different designations for these brushes, and I just wanted to highlight that for us. So we're going to go on this Kyle's Real Oils 01. And then what we want to do now is go ahead and take a look at our brush settings, and we want to set a few of these items here. In our brush tip shape, this is where we can set the spacing. If I were to set it really long distance, well, let's get on the right layer here, and let's make this really big for our sample. If I were to do that, you can see it just punches it in every so often. Every, you know, whatever 148% is of the size of the brush, it just punches it in. Now, of course, the color's all off. We'll fix that in a moment. So I like to have my spacing, you know, really close so it just smudges it around. But we also then want to go to, I like to go to Shape Dynamics. And here's where we get a little bit of fun. The size jitter, this is where we're going to vary the size. Right now we're at 400 pixels. We can see up here in the upper left-hand corner, we're at about 400 pixels on the size of this brush. All right, as I move over to the image here, we can see it's roughly, you know, that size as far as the overall size of the item is concerned, the overall size of the picture is concerned. But it will vary that by 5% as I'm painting. And so it creates just a slightly different feel, slightly different sense. And the control of that is pen pressure. Or is that's actually for the diameter, it looks like, come to think of it. So the minimum diameter 45%. So as I'm working with my pen, see if I have just a little bit of pressure versus a lot of pressure, that's where I have that size difference, and I like to have that as well. All right, then the angle jitter, that is just about the angle of the brush. Do I want to rotate that at all? And I like to do that. I like randomness at this stage. Sometimes I don't want that, but at this stage I want some randomness. So I'm going to be happy to accept 14%-ish, somewhere in there. And then what I also like to do, I've experimented with the roundness jitter. On these types of brushes, I really don't see that big of a difference because they're already very differently shaped. This is not a big deal, I don't think. And then I do like to do the flip X and flip Y jitter. So watch what happens when I tap it. It'll rotate because of the angle jitter, but also take a look there. It flipped it around. And so every time I tap the brush, you know, once I drag it, it's all the same. But it's between applications that happens, where it modifies the shape and position of that brush. All right, we have the brush set up now with these settings. Now it's time to finalize the deal and go along here with what we've got with these settings in the options bar. All right, so the main thing is right now it's picking up the load color, what they call the brush load color. This brush load color is what we were painting. What do we want? It's as if we had a palette here and I was dabbing it in and I wanted to paint that. Well, this is the mixer brush tool. We want to actually take what's in the photo and we want to paint that. That's what's important to us right now. So we actually don't need to worry about this. What we're gonna do is come to this next item over here, and that says load the brush after each stroke. If that's selected, that's what's gonna happen. So when I pick up the brush, it's as if I'm going to that paint and I'm dabbing more paint on my brush, and then I'm going back to my canvas. So I'm actually gonna take this off, and you can see that went clear. So now we're not taking any paint from any type of palette. We're simply gonna go take it from the image itself. Now this next one, let's see what that tooltip says. Clean the brush after each stroke. Yes, I definitely say we want to do this, because if I didn't do this, what would happen is if I were to paint down here, and I've painted there and you can see that's kind of going along, all right, if I haven't cleaned my brush after each stroke, if I come up here and I want to paint in the sky, I'm going to start with that color that I just applied, that I just worked with. And I don't want to bring that color somewhere else in the photo. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z, Command Z. And I'm going to go ahead and click this again where I say, yes, I want to clean that brush every single time. Every time I lift it, I want to clean, I want to start fresh wherever I'm at in the photo. All right, these next items, these are where we're definitely a little bit, maybe I should say nebulous, or you need to experiment to see what works best for you. For the most part, I have appreciated these settings. So the wet settings and the load, it says set the amount of paint picked up from the canvas. So yes, we probably want a fairly high amount. Since we're picking up from the photograph, we want a high amount that we're going to drag around and we're going to manipulate, because those pixels for the image, that's what we're manipulating, that's what we're using as paint. We want a high amount there. The load value at 100%, it's just a standard setting. Set the amount of paint on the brush. Do we want to load it up? Yes. Well, since we're not starting with an amount of paint to begin with, I question whether or not this value does any good with the settings we currently have. Mix, so 35%, set the color mixing ratio for the stroke. Again, this is something I'm not picking up paint. I'm not starting with any paint that I'm loading, so this pretty much has hardly any value at all. But now the flow, this does have some value. This is how much of it is going to be applied. You can think of it kind of as an opacity for your paintbrush in this case. So I do like having that. This next one, enable airbrush style build-up effects. Yeah, that can be nice. So this works with your flow. If you were to have this flow be lower set, it can then work more in tune with that, and you can build up your effects. So that's pretty nice. This next one says set smoothing for stroke. Use higher values to reduce the shakiness of the brush strokes. As you can see here, I've got a 0. I've found that this is okay. I'm not that concerned about this setting for some reason, so I've not really seen a value in needing, oh, I'm jittery or whatever the case is. Things are really smooth, especially since I've got the stylus, so I'm not that concerned about it. All right, set additional smoothing options. Again, not worried about that. Set the brush angle. So this is where if I were to have basically what kind of angle am I going to tell it to assume that I have. Some brushes you can set that according to the pen. And then here's the last one. Always use pressure size when off. Brush preset controls pressure. Yeah, that's fine. We already have a brush preset, so this will be off. I skipped this one, sample all layers. We definitely want this because we need to go down below in the layers below, and we need to pick up that information, and we need to use that as our paint. Okay, we finally have been through all these brush items. It is time to get painting, and we will do that now. So as we begin this painting process, what I like to do is to start out with a kind of a larger brush, and then as I'll need to, I'll go to a smaller brush. But really what I found to be helpful is to have generally the same size brush to be used throughout. Now this is a brush that does leave some holes behind. As I mentioned with that idea of having this art history layer, we do get some holes left behind. So what I want to do is just be able to turn that off now, because it's going to draw its information from the photo layer, but it's going to paint on this layer 1 here that I have. So this is my initial paint layer, which I'll probably label later, but let's just take a quick gander again at our brush settings to make sure we've got the right brush settings going on here. So I'm going to be in my mega pack, and I'm going to be in the Real Oils, and I'm going to select the Real Oils 01. And that is going to be my starting point. But then of course we go back here to brush settings, and we make sure to turn on our jitters, a little bit of the angle jitter, just a hair of size jitter, so I can have a little bit of randomness going to it. The angle jitter is going to give me the randomness that I want, and then of course the flip jitters are going to give me excellent amounts of randomness as well. This is a little bit on the small side of things. Oops, let's take a look. I didn't take this part off, and then everything else is looking good, but I do need to hit sample all layers once again. And so I'm going to take the size of the brush up just a little bit as well. So in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 pixels to start out with for this resolution. And remember, with our resolution, we can think in inches as well. If I were to make a 300 pixel brush, since it's 300 dots per inch, pixels per inch, then that brush is going to be effectively an inch wide. So as you're thinking about painting on a real canvas, if you were to have an inch wide brush, does that make sense to you to use that size of brush? In these little details, I would suggest probably that doesn't make sense to use that big of a brush. So I'm going to be using smaller brush there, but here in these details down yonder here, probably makes a lot of sense to do that. And so that's where I think I'm going to go ahead and start. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. About 50% on my view is what I like to see. And then oftentimes too, I can just go ahead and hit this F key, and that just gets rid of everything on the screen, and I only have the photo that's on the screen. And so I just start painting, and I just will follow the ridge. Now again, that is probably a little bit on the large side, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit smaller using my left bracket. There we go. And you'll notice this brush is very different in behavior compared to that art history brush, which I really didn't dive into a lot of details with the art history brush, but also because this is pressure sensitive. If I just do a little bit, I'm not doing the entire brush. If I press really hard, then it starts to really express the entire brush. And then notice how I'm going to be able to keep the feel of these items here in the bush with what I'm doing with my hand here as I'm going along. And if I ever want to bring something in, you know, I just nudge it down and bring it in. Now here's another thing that's happening with this brush and how it's behaving. It is drawing information from all layers, but I already have this whole area filled in now, so it's only going to effectively draw from this layer that I'm on because it is already fully opaque. So it's going to be just smudging around the stuff from this layer. It's when I bring stuff from outside, that's where it's going to be influenced by what's going on with what's out there on the layer beneath it, the actual image layer. And then I want to be remembering, I'm going to use, my goal is to use the original photo as part of the texture, part of the overall sense of the subject, sense of what I have going on here. And we'll get to that, but I just want to keep that in mind to say, you know what, I'm not going to go crazy with this. I'm going to take that all crazy into some other direction. I want to really hold in. I want to just go down that exact line as best as possible and follow the contour. And since I'm using the tablet here, I have it programmed for this lower button. That should be a default. If I just hold that, that gives me the hand tool. So I'm just going to follow this. There we go. And sometimes I'll also do this in different layers itself. So like this foreground element, I would layer on top of the items that are behind it or underneath it, whatever the case might end up being. And I've done it that way too, and that can be really helpful. So I can see myself doing that also on this photo as well. You don't want to get too big of a brush, because then it's just going to be basically too much of a stroke. Now I want to show you just really quickly now what this has done. So let me go ahead and I'm going to hit the F key again, and I'm going to take off this background layer. And so you can see some of the holes that I was talking about that happens with this brush, and especially along the edge. And this is just something where I really want to encourage the idea, just be okay with it. Just understand this is the nature. This is what would happen if you had true paintbrush going on. You would see, of course, the canvas, and you would want to go back through and go over here and whatever else. But I have found I really appreciate the idea of having this underlayer. So let's bring this underlayer in. And this is also a work in progress. Now, you know, this is all stuff that we have yet to paint with the regular paint, but all those items that would be underneath through these holes, in the end, it turns out okay. So let's bring the photo back on, get ourselves back out to about a 50% view, and I'm gonna hit my F key to isolate just the photo and get rid of all the other stuff, and just get back to it. When I have a major item like this, I want to keep the major sense of the tonality. You notice how that tonality changed? And so it's important to be able to not just go too wild with it. So that's where I start doing some different strokes here, where I'm going to be keeping the localized detail of the color and the tonality, rather than just sweeping it all the way through, because then that would just drag it out. And each time when I lift, remember we have the brush set to clean. Each time when I lift, and then also, there we go, how it's going to behave when I'm dragging. There we go. Maybe just tidy up a little bit. Then we want to think too about just the overall sense of the flow of the paint, and how this is going to, you know, be affected. Do I want to create a little bit of a feel of that extra flow coming through? And I think that's appropriate to do. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I think I'm going to include all of this on its own layer along with this element. So all these are going to be on one layer, and then these darker pieces, I think I'm going to do that on its own layer, and in the end it will be behind it or under it in the layer stack. But let's go ahead and start these items, and that's where I'm going to start on the major parts. The ridges here are going to be, and when I have a transition like that, you know, I need to go back over and I need to fix that, so not a problem. All right, so this will be one of these things where we zoom through and we'll pick it up when I'm done, and we'll readjust the layers and do all that stuff when I'm done with this portion. That one didn't take too bad, not too long. Let's zoom out here and take a look at the overall work. Actually, we'll just do that. There we go. So, oh, did I skip a piece? Oh, it looks like I skipped a little bit of a piece down here. So let me go ahead and just fill in there. The nice thing about the way I have the brush set, if I need to get into just some details, I just tickle the surface with my pen, and then it just creates a small area. The fact that the brush is showing really large, it's in the center of the brush that it's actually only affecting when I just tickle it and then I can get some of those small areas coming in. All right, excellent. I'm really focusing on, the swoop and the flow of the landscape, when you're there. And this is part of that idea of what we want to do when we're at a location. We want to hopefully absorb it a little bit and get a feel, get a sense for it. And that's what we're communicating. And that's where just how that just all flows together. And of course, this is all eroded landscape. So that flowing sensation just adds to the overall scope and feel of it, right? So let's hit the F key here to get back to our layers. I'm going to turn this layer off, and we'll call this initial paint, and I'll call it lower for the lower section of the frame here. Now this middle section is probably going to just be everything here in the middle section. I'm going to put on a different layer, and then there will be a couple of layers where we're going to basically kind of smooth things out a little bit. So this is going to build in and layer in over time. And so we're just going to start with a new layer and keep the same brush setting, same everything else. Since I want to think about how this is going to be the lower part and I want it to be dimensional, I can think, okay, this is going to be on top of, I'm not going to show it yet because I don't want this information sampled if I were to overlap it at all. I don't want this information sampled at all. So I'm just going to be knowing in my mind, I'm tucking it away and saying, okay, that's where that's going to be. Now let's move further and let's get into these other parts. So I'm going to hit the F key once again. I need to make sure I'm on that layer. There we go. Now we can get back to it. And when I start here in these items, just make sure I'm at around 50%. So one more tap in, now I'm at 50%. And now we're ready to brush. So as you saw in the last section where I was coming down the line here and being really careful to follow the line, since that's going to be on a layer on top of, I don't need to be so careful this time on that line. Plus, I'm going to do that additional layer where things will be blended together more easily. So I can actually get rid of this, just going to undo that. And as I'm sweeping in this way, if I come through here, that's not going to be a problem if I go overboard, because let's go ahead and just take a look, because I'm going to be bringing this in so you can see how that just covers over it. So we're going to use the power of the layers to my advantage here. Now this transition does look ugly, and I'm going to worry about that later. It's not something I want to worry about right away. So I'm going to go ahead and take that back off and keep on this layer and hit my F key, and let's get back to painting here. You'll also notice when I have major ridges like this, I like to do these first, so I make sure I keep those items, especially these dark ones here. I want to keep those, and I tend to lighten up my stroke so on the pen so it becomes fairly focused on that line only, and so it can become a really defined element. And I think that's hugely important to keep those elements defined, especially in these shadow areas where I'm going to probably have to do a little bit of work in post painting, if you will, to brighten some of these areas up just a little bit. And I'll change my technique again to grab these items so they can maintain their characteristic, their character of what they add to the image. But then when it's time to sweep and go through, then we can sweep and go through. And I've already got those major lines figured out. And everything's good, everything's happy, everything's working well, and it will blend well together. All right, I'm gonna make my little head fade away here, and we're gonna continue on with speeding through the paint job here. And I'll slow it down if I need to bring anything to your attention or what have you, but let's just speed through this starting now. right, it is now time to blend some of this together. So I'm gonna hit the F key to get out of the full screen view and bring in our foreground layer and bring in our background layer. And it is starting to really take shape. Woohoo! That sky is gorgeous. I'm probably gonna tone it down just a hair. It looks a little too intense, but otherwise it really is coming together really nicely, I think. So I'm gonna take this down to about maybe 60%, and it's just blending in now with a photo in the background, which is fine. It's just, that's fine to have a little bit of that photorealism coming together. But now what it's time to do, we're gonna create a whole nother layer here. And so let's just call this paint mid ground, maybe. That might work well. And then this is a touch-up layer, because I want to go through and really zoom in at 100% and make sure that I've got everything covered. Everything is what needs to be happening. And I do this, I found it really helpful to go ahead and take off these two layers, the photo layer and that art history base layer, so I can really see where my holes are, and I can determine, do I need to fill those? Is it important for me to fill those? And if so, to what level, to what degree am I going to fill it? This is also usually where I will take a smaller brush and I will start really giving some detail brush stroke areas to some of these areas. And then I'm going to want to do a different item. I'm going to do an overlay for that sunburst that's coming through in the photo that kind of got lost here in the painting. So I'm going to do that as a separate layer as well. But let's continue on now with this touch-up layer and see what we can get ourselves into with this. Now this is of course on a whole new layer, and I oftentimes will like to either consider doing the same brush or even changing brushes. This is where I'm going to be wanting to add additional details, like I mentioned, and so changing the brush will change the overall effect, the overall feel of the overall painting. And that's where these big pieces, I'm going to go ahead and just fill them in, and I'm going to just kind of go super quick and fill these areas in with the same brush. But the small areas that need a little bit of help, that's where I'm going to go ahead and say, let's change up our brush to this other oil brush that has really shown some good promise for the aesthetic and the overall style that I'm wanting to convey, that I want to have come through with my paintings. It's probably big enough. I'll grab that one too. And so I'll just grab a few more of these areas where it's really tiny, just specks. I'm not going to be so concerned about. It's these gaping holes. Those are the ones I really want to fill in. And I want to make sure that we don't have anything too massively obtrusive coming through. And again, if I were to do my art history brush underlay, for the most part, you know, things are covered, things are looking good. All right, a couple more on these major pieces, just getting the major ones, trying to respect the original contours of the land if I can do that at all. And truly what this is doing is just taking some paint from the current layer and it's just smudging it around, because I don't have anything from lower layers coming in. I have those lower layers turned off. But that's all right. It does a really good job of just smudging those things around. All right, let's change our brush now. We're going to go to our brushes here. And this Kyle's Bristly Wet Oil, I really found this. Look how just different. I'm going to make this really big. It's just a super different texture to the brush. Overall, I like it with a small application. But what I'm able to do now, let's zoom in on some of these areas. And I like to be about 100% when I do this, even smaller here. Oh goodness, I did not change the character of my brush. There we are. And we'll go ahead and sample all layers, even though I only have the one layer, a couple of layers visible actually, all the beneath layers, but just not the photo layers. And this is where it really starts to give me a delicious painting sensation. Now, I don't have the default behavior of this brush is not to do the flip jitters or the size jitter. I want some of that still coming in because I do still appreciate the randomness that is able to happen when I have that going on. For some reason it doesn't like clicking up there. There we are. And so because this is a more complex brush, it might slow down the computer a little bit, where I can brush a lot quicker than what the computer is going to show for me here. And what I really should do too, I've got this transition right to the art history underneath. Let's go ahead and bring that opacity up. And I probably want to work this transition a little bit too. So that's where I do need that art history layer actually visible. And let's see, my flow is 100%. Let's take my mix up and see if that helps with what I'm doing here. And a slightly bigger brush, that will help. There we go. I am, when I bring back that texture layer, I am going to have something whatever this ridge is that I'm dealing with, I am definitely going to have something in that texture layer that I'll have to watch for, because I'm really destroying the authenticity, or whatever you want to call it, of whatever this ridge is. And since it's so far in the background and whatnot, I'm not going to really want to bring more attention to it anyway. So it's fine that it's going crazy. There we go. That's starting to blend in pretty nice. And see, the nature of this brush is helping to match the nature of this art history brush that I was using. There we go. Yeah, that's coming together. I'll have to do something else in here to bring some color back into this, because that's just pure white and I don't want that to be pure white. But I will deal with that a little bit later. There we go. That's getting more of the results I wasn't paying attention. I was actually painting on the art history base, which isn't going to ruin anything. It's just it wasn't touching this overlay touch-up layer at all. It was doing everything on the underneath layers, which is fine. Not a big deal. It's just now I'm also able to affect things that are coming down over it into the foreground, which is what I wanted to be able to do. All right, now that I've corrected myself, let's go ahead and look at this transition region once again, because this is ugly. This is absolutely hideous, and we just got to fix this. And as we zoom in, you can see, you know, some of the things of what's happening with the previous paintbrush and how rough that gets. And that's just the nature of the paint. So I'm not terribly concerned about that, but I am terribly concerned about this transition here. So I'm going to zoom back out a little bit, and this thing will take my taps. There we go. Oh, 66%. Do I want a 50%? Yeah, we'll probably go 66%. It's a good view. And I am on the top layer, so it's just affecting, you know, the build. The layer stack is everything here. Because if I were to go for some reason now and take off that layer, of course I have my ugliness coming back again. And I don't want to do that. So this is about building in layer by layer and keeping those in the right order. And now we're able to bring some beauty and sanity back into this transition edge. Now certainly I could have done this whole painting on a single layer, but I just figured it was a little bit easier to deal with some of these things in separate layers. And you might be thinking too, you know, doesn't using a different brush just on the edges, does that create some kind of visual anomaly that it just doesn't seem to be making sense? And certainly it can. That's why I'm going to be going over the whole painting with this and doing other touch-ups here and there. I'm not going to be restricting it just to these edges, that's for sure. So as I'm, you know, trying to keep the sense of these that I was creating here and blending it in with the background, I just found that this particular brush did a really good job, especially with these types of grasses and whatnot, of being able to blend that in beautifully. And if you need to, take your flow down. I'm finding that I'm okay here, but if it's really problematic and it's just looking ugly and that transition just doesn't go well, then take down your flow, and then that transition should start to really just come together in a yummy fashion. Okay, let's finish this part off. Get back to my smooth. There we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pause your presentation here, and I'll come back when I'm done with this part of everything, and we'll pick it up in just a few seconds, and we'll review what's going on, and then we'll go right into creating that sunburst. Hey, time to finish this image up now. We can take a look really quick at this touch-up layer and what exactly it's all about. When we're zoomed out, it's just like, you know, what are you doing, Brent? There's not much here. But let's zoom in on some of these items. So for instance, we can see what's going on here. As I zoom in and get in closer and closer to these details, we can really see it, of course, at 200% detail. So as we're working with that original brush, we can see these transitional areas between these edges, between these ridges especially, but even sometimes in just this regular area where it's in the middle of something, it just has this rather ugly effect, and that's something I want to get rid of. So I go through with that other brush and just get rid of all that extra stuff. Now here's a little extra more that I probably should have done right here. So let's transition back to our brush, our mixer brush, and get on this and then make sure, yeah, it's the right one. So as I paint back in here, we'll just finish up couple of items there, make it a wee bit smaller for some of these other areas in here. There we go. And this is definitely something that I like to do even in over the course of a couple of days. So, you know, what I'm doing here for this video, I'm just kind of going through a once-over kind of idea. We're going to get it really close to what the final result's going to be. But what I like to do also is to go ahead and put it away for a little bit and then come back to a day later, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit more than a day later, and just, you know, give it another once over, another twice over, whatever it takes to be super comfortable with the results that I have coming through here. And see, that last one I just messed up. Let's just get this. And you know, you can also say, well, Brent, why didn't you just do this in the first stage, in the first part of the whole process? Well, the first part of the whole process, you know, it's about getting a certain sense, a certain texture, a certain feel in the brush, and it builds up, and things tend to build up over the course of, you know, the work that you're doing. And for the most part, that major brush does a really fine job. And then with this little brush that we're dealing with now, it also does a great job, but it's just, it has a different character, and I like to have those characteristics a little more localized, that kind of a thing. All right, looking pretty good with that. So the next thing that we're going to do, I have some of these actually already built up here now. I've kind of worked ahead a little bit, and we're going to be able to see exactly, you know, how all these different kind of things come into play here. But let's take a look now at dealing with the sun. I have this layer called the sun, and what I'm concerned about here is just the idea that we've got a really bright application of the sun. And so what I ended up doing was I'll take a sampling, let's say, of this slightly darker color here, And we can see that it is, 255, 243, 215. If I wanted to, I could go, a little more down the line and get a little more saturation in there. In this case, I don't think it's hugely that big of a deal as long as it's still fairly bright. It still needs to be really bright, so we have that sensation of the sun. And so when we have that color, I then create a new layer, get on my regular brush. So I'm going to go here to the regular brush tool, and I'm just going to make this huge, like 800,000 pixels, somewhere in there. Yeah, 800 is good enough. Make it super soft. So if I were to reveal that, the hardness is 0. And then I'm on my new layer again, and I can just punch it once or twice. So click once, click twice, and we're not done yet because we need to then go to the layer mode, and I like to do darken here. So what that does is just says, hey, for all the pixels on this layer, if you're the darkest, you're going to be the one that shows. If the layers beneath it are darker, then that's going to be the pixel that shows. That's going to be the color that shows. And so you can see we've got a significant something going on here, significant darkness happening here, and that's probably all right. It's what I want, to have that brilliance. Now, if this is too much, well, then we just take it back to, like, I don't know, 50% maybe, and then it only comes in a little bit. See, we still have that little bit of that nudge towards the brightness, but we still have the brighter effects still kind of coming through because, again, we darkened that color a little bit, so we're just balancing it out a little bit. So we still have some of that sense of that color coming through, but it's not just totally flattening it out like it was at 100%. So I can get rid of my sun layer now. I've done that. Now let's take a look at our sun rays and what we're dealing with there. What I ended up doing on that is just simply painting it out with a soft brush. So let me show you how that works. So just going to take a blank layer once again. I'm using that same color, or I could even do a slightly brighter color. It doesn't really matter at this point. I just need something that's really bright because I'm going to use it to affect the layers underneath it. I'm not going to use it to affect the sun itself. These are about the rays. So as long as it's really bright, we're going to be in the right ballpark. But what I do need to do, I need to get rid of everything but the photo, because that's where the rays originally existed. So I'm going to take my brush, go nice and small, and remember we have the feathered edge, so that's going to be to our benefit. I'm going to do a slightly different approach than I did the first time I did this, and that is I'm going to start down here, and I'm going to kind of ride the edge. I'm going to hold shift and click, and I'm going to start down here again, and then I'm going to go on the other edge of that sun ray. And you can see we're creating this really, pointed triangle shape here. And I'll do the same thing here with this. Let's see, kind of going like that, and going like that, and continuing on here with this. And I don't really have a strong one over this way, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of create one anyway here. And I've got a shorter one kind of sort of coming through here. And I could even create another one over here. I see a hint of one coming in over here. I probably should go ahead and, there we go, make that more ray-like. Now, doesn't that look gorgeous? Of course that looks hideous. We're not going to be sticking with that, but it's a great start. So now let's take our painting layers and bring those back, turn off the photo, and then all we need to do is probably blur this a little more. It's just a little bit too sharp. So let's go ahead and take this, and we're going to do the blur, we're going to do Gaussian blur, and in the neighborhood of 40 pixels is probably good. 40 to 50 pixels for the resolution I have here is probably fairly decent. So let's just do that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take this and go to lighten. It's the exact opposite of what we did before with the sun. And this is to say, look, if this is a pixel, is it brighter than what's beneath it? Then let's have it show. If it's darker than what's beneath it, then that should show. So we're going to go ahead and keep it on lighten. But then, of course, this is just too powerful. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% works super well here. Let's do the eyeball to turn it on and off. And then I even want to just go ahead and expand this if I hit Command T, there it is. I can then expand this, and I'm not holding any modifiers, so I'm just making it expand bigger. There we go. And even still with that 8%, it's a little bit too much. It's probably a little bit strong for this rendition of the sun rays. So I'm probably going to go ahead and take this down to like 6%. There we go. That's a lot better. All right, so then we want to enhance the saturation just where those sun rays are. So I'm going to bring in an adjustment layer. And so what we're going to look at with that is, let's go ahead and bring in the adjustment layer, and it's going to be hue saturation. And let's see, that's right over the top of that. Let's go ahead and name these so I don't... I'll call this Sun 2 since it's my second time doing this. And we'll call this Sun Rays 2. All right, and we'll go ahead and leave that hue saturation 2 as it is. That's fine. Notice it has a mask there. We want to basically take what's in the layer of the sun rays, and we want to transfer it to the mask in the hue saturation. So if I were to command click, I will grab the pixels, basically. I will grab the pixels that are in that layer, and then I can go over here and I can click on the layer mask. But now I've got nothing. All I have is a selection. I don't have anything about that selection. What I need to do now is fill that selection. So let's go and do that. What we're going to do is we're going to come here to the gradient tool. We're going to go down to the paint bucket tool, and we're going to fill it with black because that's the opposite of the color that we have already on the mask. We just need the opposite, a contrasting color. So I'm going to go ahead and click inside of that, and you can see here it's filled it in. So let me hit Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to hold Option so we can preview, and we can see this is exactly what we did before on the layer, but now it's on the mask. And so what I'm going to be able to do now is I need to invert that. So I'm going to click on it again, and now I'm just going to hit Command I. So black conceals, white reveals, and so now whatever changes we make here, it's going to show through to the under layer, all the layers beneath it. So let's click on this, and let's bump our saturation so you can really see it gross, right? We are going to tone that back so we just have a little bit of a little extra saturation coming through, because what happened before with those sun rays, yeah, it brightened it up just a little bit, but it really wasn't doing the job that we needed it to do. So we're going to give it a little extra kiss of extra color coming through with that as well. And I think that turns out pretty nice. About a +6, +10. Let's try +10. I prefer the +10 myself. I'm still finding this rendition of the rays to be a little bit too strong as we get down here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a mask here. I'm going to get back on my gradient tool, and then I'm just going to have that fade out. I'll probably even lengthen that fade a little bit. So it starts to decrease and decrease, and let's just turn it on and off. We can see what's happening there. Perfect. I love it. That is coming through pretty nicely, pretty decently. Okay, so we dealt with this, the sun and the rays, and now the sky touch-up. Now, this sky touch-up is definitely something that is going to be what really seals the deal for me in this sky. Let's zoom in and let's take a look at exactly what's going on in this sky. So we'll recall the very beginning, I was using the art history brush, and it gave this wonderful texture, which is great, but it's a little too much. So let's do sky touch-up, and I'll show you what I did there. So back on my mixer brush, I'm going to take this brush that we've been dealing with, this new brush, this oil brush that we've been dealing with, just to remind ourselves exactly what we're talking about. It's Kyle's Bristly Wet Oil. That's the one we're dealing with right now. And then, of course, I've modified it a little bit with those modifications to do different jitters and whatnot. But now what we need to do, I'm going to take off all these things that shouldn't be there. Okay, so we're fine now. And what I want to do, the flow of 36 is actually pretty good. I want to just go through here and paint a little bit. And 36 is probably a little high. What I want to do is start to blend in some of these items where those really significant brush strokes are coming through. So let me undo that and let me take this flow way down. Let me try it about 8% or so. Let's see what happens there. There, now we're cooking with gas. That is almost perfect. I think we need a little more. We're probably going to end up at around 12%, maybe 13 at the most, or somewhere in there. Yes. And what we're looking to do is just take off the edge. We're going to take off the edge of those brush strokes that are just really coming through from that art history brush. And look how that just kind of blurs in a little bit. To me, that's gorgeous. I love it. Now, it does take, the computer does need to catch up with me a little bit here. So as I'm going through, it takes a little bit of time for the computer to catch up and say, hey, we're done with this brush stroke. And this is another thing where I say save often, because the reason I have multiple copies of this is because literally when I was doing this the first time around, the computer literally crashed. And while Photoshop does a good job of keeping you up to date with a recoverable file, the video that I recorded didn't. And so you just want to save often, at least in the important work. I can do a re-recording 6 ways a Sunday, but if I lose the work in Photoshop, that's where I start to get really depressed. Thankfully, as you can see, I didn't lose it, but I did lose a little bit of it. But I'm redoing it all because that video got lost. All right. So rather than sitting through that whole thing, let's go ahead and just turn on what I did previously. And I really liked the results that I got. So I'm going to pull a Julia Child trick and bring that forward, and it's all done, ready to go, and it looks beautiful. It looks good. Okay, so we have our sun rays. We've got the extra sun information coming through. Oh, that sun information, that probably needs to come up to the top. Just, I mean, that was our plain brush, just in case kind of a thing. Increase our saturation overall a little bit. And now I've got just 2 more things I want to apply to the image overall. And then we're going to take a look at the overall tonality of things. And if I feel I need to, I'm going to do a vignette as well. So one of those items I'm going to be looking at here is this layer here. This is a brick texture that comes from a wall that I photographed in Prague, Czech Republic. And so what this is going to do, we're actually going to use this to make it look like we're building up some paint layers. We have some 3-dimensionality to the image. So what we need to do, we go to filter, and we're going to go to stylize, and then we're going to go to emboss. Certainly I could create an emboss effect on a layer, on the layer's style itself, but I don't want to. I just want to do it this way. This is a little more simple approach to doing it. I'm going to try actually this time 3 pixels and about a 120%. I have experimented with these other numbers, and then I always tend to pull it back a little bit. So I'm going to start with lower numbers to begin with. Certainly, you want to do it to taste. You want to do it according to the image that you have, and then to the aesthetic that you're going for. I'm not suggesting these are the right numbers all the time. Just figure out what works for you with what you are hoping to do with your work and the image that you're creating. And then, of course, if these items get to be too strong, then you need to be able to create a mask or do something to pull it back in a particular part of the image, or just decrease the opacity of the layer. All right, there are some pixels here. This is just a straight application of the layer. As you can see here, if we zoom in, there are going to be some pixels that are just slightly colored. And when I do this process, I really don't want that coloration to be an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command-Shift-U, and that totally takes out any color. And then what I want to do is come here and go to Layer Blend Mode of Soft Light. And then what we're dealing with is that embossing where there was no embossing effect, it was a medium gray. And when you do soft light, that medium gray becomes completely transparent. And then where it was brighter, it brightens the layer beneath it. Where it was darker, it darkens the layers beneath it. So we now have this texture coming through, and I would say it's probably a little strong compared to what I want to do, but in the end, it's gonna come out okay. So let's just call this brick texture. And I'm gonna turn this off, and I'm gonna redo this one here. I'll show you what I did to do this one. So I'm gonna take a copy of the background layer, and I'm going to put this up here, and I'm going to retitle it. Actually, I want that brick texture out of, there we go, out of the group. There we are. So background copy, I'm gonna retitle this to say photo texture. And then let's turn it on. Let's do the exact same thing. I'm going to do the embossing, and if I just do this one right here where it says filter emboss, it's gonna take those exact same parameters that I had previously set, and it's just gonna, boom, it's gonna do it. And here we can really see the color coming through. So Command Shift U to get rid of all the color. And then I just come here to soft light. Now this is a little bit of a challenge because we can see here we've got some areas where I didn't follow the contour of the photo perfectly, and this is just gonna look weird. So we need to get rid of that. Now, because we have texture throughout, take a look at what's going on in the sky here. We have texture throughout coming through in this picture, which is great, but I can't just use a mask to get rid of this because then that would mean no textures there. What I actually wanna do now is use the clone stamp tool. I'm gonna go really small and really soft. And I'm just gonna take a sample here, and I'm just gonna clone it, and I need my flow to be nice and high. And so I still get the texture coming through. And it starts to feel normal, looks good. All right, in certain areas, like if I were to zoom out and I have this very faint ridge coming up along here, if I make this just slightly bigger, what I can do, I can just click and then shift click, and then that whole ridge, whoops, there we go, that whole ridge is gone. But otherwise I need to get rid of these items just as a border element, as an edge border type element, because that just isn't helping me. I don't want to say I messed up, it's just the nature of the painting. Now see, something else is kind of going on a little bit funky there. Is that in this coming through? Nope, not coming through in that layer. So something else is going on a little bit funky there that I'm going to want to address. And then this is a nice straight line, so I'll just hold shift and click. And then this is relatively straight too. It makes it nice and quick to get rid of those items. And then as I look down through here, where we have the rest of the lines coming through, it doesn't look too bad. But this is where I need to come back to my touch-up layer. I then need to go back to my brush that I've been working with. And then before I start painting, what I need to do is make sure I turn off this sample all layers, because that's going to pick up the photo texture layer information. I don't want that. I just want it to only smudge, if you will, the pixels on that single layer that we're dealing with. And my flow is really low, so let's turn that back up so we can really have an effect on our subject. There we go. And we have some items down here that really need some help. There we go. And then this ridge here looking fairly decent. A little bit to fix up here, not too bad. Just depends on which direction I need to smudge the color. we are. There we are. And this actually turned out pretty decent. We have this embossing going on with this bush type element. And I actually don't mind what happened here. There's been other pieces that I've done where when I get into a bush or something like this, it just looks absolutely hideous and does not work at all. But in this case, it's actually going to be just fine. All right, a little more, bringing this in. I knew this area was going to be a bit problematic when I was painting it. All right, let's take a look at some of these other areas that we need to check up on. Not bad, did pretty good following the line here. This one could really use some help. Bring that dark ridge down to the actual line, the actual ridge line, as defined by that photo texture area. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I also want to remember I want to be thinking about making sure this looks like a natural brush stroke. Boy, this one just doesn't want to budge, it seems. Yeah, I'm on my touch-up layer. I must not have very much info here. So let's, what I'm going to do, since that's behaving kind of oddly, I'm going to turn that off. And then I'm going to tell it to sample all layers. And then I can bring some of this down and make sure it's on my touch-up layer, because I probably didn't have anything in the touch-up layer right here. And now I take off that, I turn on this, and then I can bring it back a little bit. There we go. Now it's looking fine. And make this, well, see, this is a highlighted ridge. What I really should be doing is bringing the dark color down here, rather than bringing the dark color up from below. Increase the contrast on this ridge by bringing this darker color down to the ridge. That's much better. And push it this way a little bit. There we go. Okay. Yeah, not too bad. And again, some of these are probably things that I need to come back and fix when I really want to spend a lot of time, but I think you get the idea of what we're looking for here. For the types of decisions we'd be making when we're looking to have a final piece that comes together for us. And most of these other types of items, you know, these major ones I want to deal with. But little bits here and there, it just helps feel pretty much more like a natural painting. And that's pretty much what I want to do. Okay, perfect. That is really coming together. Let's bring our brick texture back, which again makes it feel, let's zoom in on some of that. It makes it feel more like we've built up some of the paint texture. Now this brick texture might still be a little bit strong, so if I were to pull that back to say 50%, that's okay, but the photo texture certainly still comes in, you know, maybe even pull this back to 30%. and then let this photo texture come in at maybe 70%. And we still have a good presence of the texture, but not something that's super overpowering. It's not my intent to overpower the overall approach. All right, so the last items that I want to be thinking about, first off, I'm going to hit save. The last items I want to be thinking about are purely about color, tonality, those kinds of things. So I might benefit, this is a little bit on the dark side of things, so I might benefit from brightening this just a hair. So I'm going to do a curves adjustment, and I can see, okay, no problem here on the shadows. So if I were to click this, input 24, I'm going to go ahead and lock that in at an output of 24. And I'll probably do the same here in the highlights where I have one 202, 202. But here, this is where I'm going to lift this up a wee bit. And then I can turn the eyeball on and off, and I can see my results. And I like that a lot better. This is just, as far as the goals I have for the painting I'm trying to create, in this particular case, I think something like this really helps my case with what I'm trying to get across with my painting. I really do like that. So again, just quickly, oh yeah, that is just really good. That really helps a lot. And then I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do an overall hue saturation. We know I've got the extra bump in hue saturation for the sun rays, and that will still be there. But now we're going to do an overall bump in hue saturation, just saturation really, in the overall image. And so if I were to take that +4 or so, just really subtle, I think that's going to be really nice. As I consider the idea, do I want to vignette this at all? I'm really not going to do that. You can use a standard photo vignetting technique if you wanted to look that up, but I'm going to call this good right now. So this is pretty much it. I'm going to hit save again. All right, now let's go ahead and jump ourselves over to my 4 posters folder, or my 4 posters file. And let's make this a final poster. Now, I don't have the final item that says Badlands. I certainly have the item that says National Park, so I'll be able to pick that up. But as you can see, this is my final poster design for the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Really all I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it on this page. And then what I need to do is simply click this item here, hit Command D to place an image, come down here to BLNP poster art, and we'll do that one there, and it just brings it in its place. All right, and so rather than Theodore Roosevelt National Park, we will take this element, and I'm gonna make this super faded so I can remind myself this isn't it. But the national park, of course, it is a national park. I'm just going to reuse this one. I've already done it. Not a problem at all. And so I just need to reassign this to be the proper color. And so I can load my color swatch. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to hit load swatches. And I'm going to find my mood board for BLNP because that's what has my color swatch. And so it will add the color swatch as needed. So I have Isle Royal National Park orange, BLNP orange. There it is. So I need to get into the content. There it is, the content. And you can see here that beige color is applied. Let's just click on this swatch to make it the orange. And then this is that green color that I told you that was a universal color for the whole project. So I just need to title this or name this or describe this, whatever. And so this is from Pinnacle's Overlook, and then of course this is South Dakota because I have the state listed there. All right, so I just need to finish it off with doing my handwritten letter mark for calling it Badlands, and once that's done, the poster will be finished and everything is complete. Yay! And so here's my other ones really quickly. Theodore Roosevelt National Park with the horse, Minnesota's North Shore, and this is Split Rock Lighthouse State Park is representing Minnesota's North Shore. And then finally, Isle Royal National Park with a shot that I did from the island there. So thanks so much for watching. I'm really thrilled to be able to do this and have this finally all come together. There's been a lot of going back and forth in my mind. What am I going to do? How am I going to pull this together? How is it going to, what kind of ideas is it going to manifest and bring to the final results here? And here we see it. We have the final results. I'm looking forward to printing these off now and getting these mounted on the wall at the gallery so I can have my art show. I will have lots of photos also printed and things like that. So it's not going to be just these photos, these posters, but these paintings, these posters, these are the items that are going to be the pinnacle pieces, the final result of the elements that I've developed for this project. And I'm just really pleased with how it's come together. So again, thank you so much. Thrilled to have you here. Do leave some comments below. It's always wonderful to hear from you guys, and I always look forward to that. Until next time, happy shooting.